So, before we can start talking about reading and writing CSV files, we really have to first talk about how do we make sure that we are accessing the file where we think we're accessing it. So, if I put a file on the desktop of my PC, assuming Windows, let's just assume Windows for a second, then how do I make sure that that file that I'm getting is actually on the desktop? Or to put that another way, if I have to hard code the value in, so if I'm like, oh, it's like C colon backslash some username slash desktop, right? I can't hard code this username into my program because clearly that's the username for like you, the developer, or the tester, or whomever is accessing this program and to write this code. But when I run this on another computer, like when a student writes their application and sends it to me, and then I go to run it on my computer, then of course that doesn't exist. This username doesn't exist. And so then your file cannot be found and your program crashes. So let's look at some of the things that we can use to make sure we're actually accessing the file where we think we are. So if you did want to access the desktop, right? I'm just going to set up a path variable here. We can use these built-in environment paths. So environment, actually not wanting the quotes here. Environment gives us a lot of information just directly from the operating system. So we can use get folder path. And then here you can see it's automatically trying to fill in, like if I put my item into application data, then environment special folder application data is going to point me to that particular folder on the system. Whatever Windows thinks that that folder is, that is how that would work. Likewise, we could also use, instead of application data, we could use desktop. So if we were saving files on the desktop, this is how we could access that. So likewise, there are ones for handling like the system folder and things like that. If you come into the Microsoft documentation, you'll find there are lots of different ones set up: cookies, history, fonts, if you were saving a font, program files, things like that. So, if the user's done something like move their program files to a different drive, so it's not C, it's D, Windows knows these things and they're all held in this special folder environment option. Now, I do want to point out, if you ever just say in your application, like myfile.csv or something like that, um, with no folder path or directory information, it's always going to assume that you're running it directly from the same location that the exe of your application is stored in. So if this is like your debug type application folder, right? So if I go in and open my solution in open folder in File Explorer, right, and I look at my application, I'm running it from inside the debug folder, right? So if I build this and create an exe and I go look in the folder, now I have this exe. And if I'm just using a blank, no directory, no path file name, that is where it's going to reach for. It's going to reach for the exact same place that your exe is running from. So before you get started with files, that is kind of the number one thing to think about: is where am I going to store this file? And then, how can I access that no matter what system I'm on? And right now we're just going to assume Windows, but you can get into, since in .NET Core we're thinking about Linux and we're thinking about Unix, like iOS or Mac OS type systems. Saving it to some kind of app data folder, saving it to some kind of user home folder would ensure that it would always be cross-compatible with the other environments that you might be running your application on. So as we move forward, we're also going to look at how do we make sure maybe that this file doesn't already exist, or how do I overwrite it? Or if we needed to open a file, how do we check that it does exist?